Well, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 0 to 60, a long-awaited one. Sorry about the delays. There is some N54 engine build content coming soon. But on to this video, which is a Turbo Lamik setup on this FD RX7. So this is the first rotary that we have done in-house. And I've been wanting to do a video along these lines to sort of help people understand how they're setting up the Turbo Lamiks or what to do when setting up a Turbo Lamik all year. But it's been insanely busy. In fact, I think in January, Daniel, myself and Brock, we had a discussion where we were going to stop booking jobs in, and the shop is still full. In fact, we can do a little quick pan around. This is the secondary warehouse, mechanical workshop, whatever you want to call it. But this one's full, the main shop's full. We're really busy, which is good. It's a good problem to have when you're in business, but I do apologize for the lack of videos. The transmission swaps are just going crazy. And obviously, we've got a lot of people that are doing them themselves, and they need help and support. And anyway, I've digressed. Let's get on to this one, which will help people not ask so many questions. So what I want to cover in this is not the early setup of the Turbo Lamik, but the torque setup of a Turbo Lamik, which is the key to any modern electronic transmission doing what we need it to do, making it drive smooth, making it hold adequate clutch pressure when you need it, when you're making the power. Basically, it's the key to any modern electronic transmission doing what we need it to do. It's so that it knows how much torque the engine is making and what to do with the clutch packs whilst the engine's doing it. So this video, I need to assume that you've already done really basic setup. So you've got all the required signals coming into your Turbo Lamik. That's brake pedal, TPS, or pedal position. We'll touch on the differences when we get upstairs. Engine RPM and manifold pressure. Now, whether you're getting them through analog or CAN bus, it's really easy to work out. Go and Google, you can get that set up, and then you'll understand a little bit more. Or maybe this video will be relevant to you guys. So let's just have a quick look at the car. I'm gonna give you a quick rundown on the tables we're gonna play with, and then we'll go and drive it. Let's have a look at this thing. Here it is. It's a late 90s FD RX7. It's had a lot of work done to it. We'll start in the interior where it's mostly nearly standard though. So one thing to be aware of, when this come to us, it did already have a C4 automatic in it, and that's the reason the owner has essentially brought it back for a transmission upgrade. He didn't like the loose converter feel. Interior wise, it is relatively how it was from the factory. It needs a few little finishing touches like the ashtray cover and a few buttons are missing, but that's something to organize later on. The dash cluster is here. The dash cluster that was in this car, the speedo wasn't working, so it's got this white dial one in for the moment. And we have the control strategy display for the transmission. It displays gear, trans temp, mode, and any error codes that the Turbo Lamik might want to throw up, but that is finally working. The car is running a Haltech, which is just down over in the footwell, you can see that, and that is not tuned yet. We are still in the middle of getting this engine fully dialed in, but I wanted to get the trans done first, and I thought this is a good opportunity to do a video on it. Now, the thing that does excite me about this is the engine. It is the rotary. I've got to say I love the characteristics of a rotor. This does have the traditional rotary idle. I don't know the exact spec of the engine, but it's obviously got some sort of peripheral port or semi-peripheral port. It likes to idle around 1750 RPM. It is probably the worst case scenario for a ZF, especially when you're using a diesel torque converter, but there are ways we can get around it, and another reason I thought this is going to be a good car to learn from. But yeah, it's running a gigantic single turbo. It doesn't make a lot of power at the moment. It is limited by the injectors. I can't remember what it is, but I think it's got 1000s and 2000cc injectors. Not enough to make any massive power. However, I reckon it's still going to be all right on the street. So that's the car that we're working with. Let's go and have a quick look at the torque maps. Then we'll go for a drive and I'll show you how I dial in these Turbo Lamiks. All right, we're using screen capture. Hopefully this all works okay. So I've got the Tuner Pro open. Obviously this video, again, it's not for initial ultra early basic setup. If you don't understand what Tuner Pro is, go and work it out. Go and spend some time learning about it. Also go and get your base maps, XDF and ADX files installed and set up, and make sure you have a rough idea of what you're doing with them before following this video. I do see a lot of people have issues not understanding how they get the data onto the Turbo Lamik, basically not getting their head around uploading and editing the bin file that is on the Lamik with Tuner Pro. So if you don't know how to do that, go and get that worked out before trying to follow these steps, because you'll enter a world of pain. Okay, so moving on, we have a base map set up. Now, with the base maps, you download them from the Turbo Lamik forum. There are base maps for each version of supported transmission, and each base map is available for both a petrol engine and a diesel engine. Now, the point of the difference is shift points. Both of the base maps were set up, I believe, from BMW engines. The diesel characteristics, well, the diesel is based on an N57 engine characteristic, and the petrol map, I believe, is on an N54. Don't quote me on this though, but I believe it's on an N54 characteristics. So all of the torque calculations, all of the settings, all of the shift points, all of the aggression, all the settings work really well on those engines when they're in stock form. Keep that in mind, stock form, because if you modify them, it will affect the way the torque comes through the gearbox. And I want to really hit that point home. The gearbox is managing torque. The clutches are managing the torque. So you have to tell it, it has to know how much torque it's managing. Obviously, if it's trying to move, or if it's trying to manage 200 Newton meters, it needs much different pressure to if it's trying to manage 800 Newton meters. And that's to get the shift times happening in the same amount of time. So you've got to give it good data or it's never gonna give you the good drive. Okay, so base map's in, we've got TPS, we've got brake pedal, we've got RPM, everything is coming into the Lamik and you can see all that data. That's at the point when I'll take it for a drive. Now that's assuming you've done proper oil fills, the car is ready to drive, obviously. Make sure everything is mechanically ready before you get onto this. I would also recommend, if you don't understand how the mechanical side of an 8 HP works, you should probably go and work that out before you start trying to understand how to set one up. Understanding what's going on inside the transmission mechanically will make setting up the electronic side, it'll make it make a lot more sense to you, and you won't be feeling like you're reading a different language quite so often. It still feels like a different language a lot of the time. But yeah, make sure you've got a good grasp of what you're trying to do here. So basically what we've got here is, and what I'm going to focus on for this, is the torque calculation. Now the torque calc is something that Turbo Lamik has set up for when you're using one of these TCUs on an ECU that doesn't transmit the torque over the CAN bus. I've spent a lot of time playing with BMWs. In fact, the first 2 Lamik videos I did were on vehicles that had factory BMW DMEs that were transmitting the torque. So I never needed to worry about this. The third car I set up was an N54 engine with a Haltech, so the built-in torque calc was spot on. It wasn't until the 4th, 5th and 6th cars where I really started to understand the importance of the torque calc, and it is very important. We've had customers with LSs and Barras where the factory torque calc causes slip, obviously. The reason I think a lot of people get away with using the base torque values, even when an engine is not making those numbers, is the controller is clever enough to auto-adjust, and it will adapt. It will try and meet shift times and shift targets regardless of the numbers that you feed it. So even when you do feed it bad data, sometimes they drive okay. For 90% of the driving, it's okay. It's not perfect. But where it does become an issue is after it's done 1,000 adaptation cycles or whatever, if you fed it bad data to start with, the way that it calculates shifts is not correct. And I think that's where people run into issues where they've had a Turbo Lamik, they drive it for the first few times, they think it's great, but they don't notice it's learning bad behavior, and it's because it's getting bad data. I did have a customer send me recently, he didn't buy the Turbo Lamik from us. He bought it before we were selling the Turbo Lamiks, but he'd had Turbo Lamik remote in and adjust a few things to make it better for him. He still wasn't happy with what was going on. A year later, I ended up speaking to him, and I got him to do with a normal little drive that I do when I'm helping customers over the phone while I'm remoted in. And I could see that his modified M57 in a patrol was only making peak torque of about 400 Newton meters, which is about a third, no, it's probably not right. It's probably about half of what it should have been making. Yeah, this thing had a few modifications on it, but for some reason the DME tune that was on that was manipulating the torque value. So the Turbo Lamik was never getting good data. And while it drove okay sometimes, it's not right. Now, I really want to bang this point home. You've got to have torque numbers, torque values, a torque calculation set up that makes sense to the controller. It needs to be roughly what the engine is making. A lot of people do get caught up on an exact number. I don't see a lot of performance shop dynos that accurately measure torque. I see a lot of people talking about their torque figures, but Daniel here, obviously he's been playing with dynos for the last 20 years. He can look at a dyno graph and often say, hey, that torque number's not right because they haven't got this set up properly. That does happen a lot. So just keep that in mind as well. If you've got a dyno figure that says this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's OEM torque numbers. Also, OEM torque numbers and the numbers that the Lamik wants to see is crank. So it's the torque at the crank that the gearbox is managing, not at the wheels. And that is another reason why a lot of chassis dynos might not be reporting the torque values that the Lamik wants to see. However, it doesn't matter. You can, and I'm going to show you once we get in the car, you can dial the torque number in to be an OEM crank number, and you can just feel if it's right or wrong, because it will shift, and you'll feel in the shift whether it's doing it properly or not. Anyway, there's a lot that goes into this. I'm going to try and cover everything. Hopefully I don't confuse anyone along the way. So we've got an internal torque calculation because it's not coming over the CAN bus. The setting on the Turbo Lamik where you set that is this torque calculation input. Up until firmware 10.72, a lot of people missed this. Now you can't miss it because it's got an automatic feature. So when you download the base maps from the forum, this automatic detection is always set. So if you have it set to CAN bus and there is no torque on the CAN bus, it automatically diverts to the internal torque calc. That's good and helps people get out of their garages. However, I think it causes people to brush over setting up the torque calc, which leads into all the problems I was talking about. So anyway, we have the torque calculation set to internal for this car. It's a Haltech. There is no torque on the CAN. We've got to do it all internally, but that's good. I do quite like the way that the Lamik calculates torque. There's a few ways to do it. And even in the factory DMEs, it's all a calculated figure. Whether you've got a Motec, an M-Tron, whatever, the ECU is not measuring the torque value. It's something that's programmed by the tuner. It's set up by the person that does the mapping on that ECU. That's where that number comes from. So that can be wrong as well. Just keep that in mind. But I like the way the Lamik works it out. So we've got torque calculation input. It is set to internal. Haltech, got to be set that way. 90% of the Turbo Lamiks that we set up are done with an internal torque calc. Okay, starting from the top, we've got a max torque TPS limit. Now this is the petrol base map. In fact, I think the diesels are like this now. Back in the day, the older pre 10.72 maps, these would be pre-configured on the diesel map. They are no longer, you have to fill them in. It's used as a maximum amount of torque that the engine could possibly be making based on throttle position or diesel pump injection position. It's basically a limit number. This limit number is still multiplied by the pressure multiplier. So just keep that in mind. If you're setting up a diesel, your max number, whatever you put in here, it will multiply it by the pressure multiplier that we'll get to in a second. However, for a petrol car, you don't need to use this map. Now, the reason being, the core of the torque calculation is the calculated pressure torque. It is this table here. You can see on the left, we have KPA. If you're not familiar with KPA as I was going to say measurement of volume, but I've forgotten the word. If you're not familiar with KPA, go and learn about them. It's kilopascals, atmosphere, I don't even know what it is, but I know what it means. 100 KPA is atmospheric pressure. 200 KPA is basically 1 bar of boost pressure, or 14.7 psi above atmospheric. So this table here, it only goes up to atmospheric pressure or no vacuum, and then all of the cells below are for the vacuum range. Now, on a naturally aspirated engine, you spend all of your time around here. On a boosted engine, obviously, as soon as you start to make torque or make power, you're up and out of this table, and then you use the pressure multiplier. And on a diesel, it's pretty rare that you ever get below 90 on a diesel, and that's why we need to use the max torque TPS. So looking at this table here, let's focus on the petrol and focus on the RX-7. These values here I have not played with yet. They're straight from the petrol base map. And they are, again, as I said, based, I believe, on an N54 engine. So at 2,500 RPM, atmospheric pressure, so the turbos aren't making any boost. The N54 engine will make around 277 newton meters at the crank. That makes sense to me. That seems about right. And obviously, as you're lighter on the throttle, on an M54 cruising around off boost, you're normally around that 70 to 80 kPa. And if you're cruising down the street trying to get up to 60 kilometers an hour, I'd imagine it's going to be around this table here. And that would make sense. It makes sense in my head that those engines are making that between 60 and 160 newton meters cruising, light load. They're not doing any work. However, we're setting up a 13B. Obviously, it's a 2-rotor or 1.3 litre rotary engine. It's not going to be making anywhere near this amount of torque. I'd imagine at a guess, probably half, but before I actually start manipulating these figures, I want to drive the car. And when you're doing this, it's always safer to overestimate the torque value. If you overestimate the torque value, the clutches are just going to bite harder. It's going to be aggressive, it's not going to feel nice, but you're not going to damage anything. If you underestimate, or if you tell the TCU it's making less power than it really is, that's when you're going to get clutch slip, that's when you're going to wear the clutches or damage the clutches. So just something to be aware of. If you're testing, overestimate, go and drive it and work backwards. I think it's safer. However, on the same note, if I had an LS Turbo, I would leave these figures, go and drive it, and then adjust it from there. So it's not too vital, but just something to be aware of. I don't want people damaging their transmissions. We've had too many people not know what they're doing with these things and damage transmissions, and I don't like it. I'd rather you be safe. All right, calculated pressure, all these numbers here. Yeah, also just touch on it quickly. These low values, getting 10, 20 kPa, that's when you're going to be on full vacuum, hard deceleration, and that's when you'll see negative values come through on the torque calc. The reason they're important, the clutches still need to clamp on decel. So obviously coming into a corner, downshift, 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 you hear the revs come right up, you're going to need an adequate amount of oil pressure on those clutches, or else it'll just feel like it's in neutral. So you do need these negative values. Although I generally don't play with them very often. I normally leave them as is. I do normally just focus on the positive numbers. Yeah, the negative torque is the negative torque, but it is something to be aware of. Okay, base values are there. I hope I've made it clear. What we're trying to work on here is that the gearbox torque is a number that makes sense to tell the TCU how much clutch pressure to apply to the clutches, how fast to apply that pressure to get good shifts. Okay. Calculated pressure torque, that one's done. Pressure torque multiplier. Now this is a table for all the boosted cars or turbo diesels, obviously. In fact, let me bring both of them up so we can see them at the same time, because it still uses this table. What pressure torque multiplier does, it takes the 100 kPa value, so the value at no vacuum, no boost, and then it multiplies it by a boost factor. You can see here, again, it's kPa, and from 20 to 100, it's 100% of the torque value. So regardless of what your boost pressure is doing, it's basically just this table here, and that's what we want. However, once you come into boost, once you come out of this table, that's when we start making changes to it. And you can see here that basically what it does, it multiplies it by a percentage. So when you get to, say, 200 kPa in the manifold, it takes wherever you are in the RPM range, say you're at 4,000 RPM, and it times it by 200%. It's 200% of this value. So at 200 kPa, that is 1 bar of boost, 14.7 PSI. It's going to take 288 and double it. What is that? That's 580 Newton meters, which is probably about right. An N54 direct injected petrol engine, 1 bar of boost, 15 PSI is going to be around that 580 Newton meters at the crank, not the wheels. Yeah, so that's how the pressure multiplier works. Now, on a lot of cars, and I'm really going to lean on this for the rotary, because what I'm going to do on the rotary, we're going to tune the calculated pressure torque so that we get smooth shifts off boost, smooth, not slipping. And then, obviously, the rotary, its boost is going to make a lot of difference. So that's when it's going to actually start making a lot of power, and that's when it's going to need to know that it's making more torque, so it clamps under boost, but you want the whole range to be smooth. Anyway, I'll show you how we work it all out. So for 90% of the cars we set up, these are the two tables that I use. Apart from the diesels where we use max torque TPS, the torque multipliers, now I've used these tables in the past for cars with factory DMEs transmitting the torque, so it's getting the torque value from the CAN bus, and that torque value is not correct. I don't think I touched on it before, but yeah, back in the day with engine tuning, transmission tuning wasn't really a thing. So you would turn your diesel boost up and your injection and all that sort of stuff, and then you run into torque limiters. Torque limiters from the transmission, there are torque limiters in the engine as well, and I think it was bad practice, but it did happen. Tuners would manipulate the torque calculation to avoid it hitting tables where it would hit a torque limiter. And with a manual, it works fine. As long as your engine's doing everything safe and your AFR's where it should be, it's fine. But when you've got an automatic, manipulating that torque value is a problem because the gearbox doesn't know what to do with the clutches to hold the power. Anyway, I have used this in vehicles where the DME is not outputting the correct torque. and it is exactly what it is. So if it gets a value of 200 Newton meters coming in over the CAN bus, it runs that at 100% of that value, and you can add a multiplier, you can add to it, take it away to smooth out a car that's transmitting the CAN bus torque. Yeah, it wouldn't be 3 cars that I've used that on, but it is there. The same with offset engine torque and torque correction TPS. I opened the wrong table there. So torque correction TPS, again, it's just a multiplier to mess with torque based on your TPS pedal. This can be used for vehicles that, say, only have pedal position, not throttle body position, where you might have 5% pedal, but the throttle body goes to 20%. You can use this correction to make sure that the torque value you see in the controller is correct. Again, it's just another table, don't normally use it. And the same with offset engine torque. I've used that to diagnose faults. So if we've got a car that is, say the transmission's slipping, I can just go and add 250 Newton meters. It adds it everywhere. It doesn't drive nice, but you can see that by adding essentially a higher torque number, you get more clutch pressure, and then you don't have the slip. So from there on, you can go and work out that your torque calculation is wrong and make it correct. Again, it's just a quick, I've used it just really to diagnose issues. I've never left a number in there for a car that I've set up. Yeah, use max torque TPS table is just in regards to turning on the table here, and add CAN engine loss. I've never used that. I assume it's to do with negative torque values coming over the CAN bus. I've never used it. Don't worry about it, especially if you've got an aftermarket ECU. So, that's quite a lot of information. Go back and watch it if you don't understand, but that's what we're going to go and tune in this RX-7. We're going to be working on the calculated pressure torque and pressure torque multiplier to make this thing shift nicely, because I don't think it's going to shift nicely on the base maps. All right, let's go get loaded up and see what we can do. All right, hopefully we've got the dashboard set up. I think I mentioned it in the front of this video, at the start of this video, but this car is not properly tuned yet. Yeah, we've got to sort out some idle issues, and it's not making a huge amount of power at the moment, but let's see how we go. Let's make sure we are going to connect. We are connected. Give me some live data. Yeah, we are connected. Okay. Yeah, we've got TPS. All right, see if it's going to start. Not terrible. I'll put the windows up so that you can hear me, although that is a cool noise. I do like that. Okay, so I mentioned at the start of the video, this car, we are essentially using the clutches for take-up and coming to a stop. It's not using the torque converter. Reason being, you can hopefully see it now, it's idling at 1800 RPM. 1800 RPM with a diesel torque converter is too high. It'll want to push through or pull the engine down. Really, I feel 1150 RPM is about the limit for the BMW N57 torque converter, and you can modify them. And I think ultimately that's what I would like to see in this car, a modified torque converter, but it's just a street car. The way that we're going to use it right now, it's going to operate like a DCT basically. So we got clutch for take-up, but we'll talk about that at the end of the video. Let's get the torque dialed in. All right, let me get out on the street. Let's see what happens. Actually, you can see TPS there. So the car is just starting to creep. That's the way that we've got the clutch sleep strategy set up. Feed it some TPS and it moves. Hopefully you can hear me all right. It's always fun in a loud car. It does sound good. It sounds so good. We'll get some audio later. Let's focus on getting this driving properly. So we are in P1. I'm in auto mode. You can see, hopefully you can see, the Lamik thinks the engine is making 90 to 100 Newton meters right now. That's 1800 RPM, no pedal, no TPS. It's not making that much torque. No, we're gonna see how it drives. This car's not been driven yet. It's been on the dyno, but it's not been driven. It just smells like it's using a lot of fuel. All right, let's go. We're driving. And we're in third gear already. Okay. All right, it's not happy. That is because we have N54 shift points. Oh, also, we've got shift points for a very different diff ratio. Let me just come to a stop. Let me downshift. So what happened then was it's wanting to upshift. It got into third gear and the engine's not ready for it. I think the engine's also on like a cold start behavior. So before we adjust the torque, let's adjust the shift points. Now, if you haven't been through it, all the shift points happen through your program mode. The program mode, we're in P1, we're using auto mode 1. So let's go and adjust auto mode 1. We have RPM limits. These are RPM limits for each of the gears. We have automatic settings. And go and have a look at the manual so that you understand how the auto shift maps work. There's heaps of them. But basically what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna switch P1 to use auto mode 3. I think that's the easiest way. That's going to use 6, 7, and 8. Actually, I won't do that, because if I did that, we will lose having program modes or having different modes for automatic. So I can see Daniel has messed with shift points here because he had it on the dyno, didn't he? Okay. All right, that took me a lot longer to get dialed in. Obviously, I'm trying to keep the revs above 2,000 RPM. I've never set a car up with an auto or an 8-speed to do that. And when I say the revs, the downshift points above 2,000 RPM, what I ended up changing were the minimum RPM points for each of the gears. And that's got me good enough for this video. All right, let's work on the torque. So I want you to watch what's going on with the display, watch the slipped clutch gauge as it goes through the gears. Obviously you need slipped clutch to change gear. And watch me as I move backwards and forwards, because this is where we're going to dial in the torque. And I know it's definitely reading too high, because what I try and do, I try and get it to be a smooth shift around the 25 to 30% pedal, which is what I'll do now. So we're in first. And it jolts. It pulls. All right, 3 to 4 wasn't too bad, but we're sort of getting to the point where the mass of the car hides it a little bit. So, and I do just want to point out as well, we've got to get the idle tuning sorted out. It's kind of fighting the transmission a little bit. I'm also getting a few pops and bangs, which I know Daniel doesn't like. So we've got to get the engine sorted yet. All right, torque. Let's have a quick look. So it's pulling into gear. We're going to do the maps that we were talking about when we were up in the office, calculated pressure torque. Basically, I'm going to take this entire range and I'm going to pull 15% out of it. There's been a lot of pulling 15% out, shift points, everything. Rotaries are lazy. It's not enough. Another 15. Another 15. Another 15. Yeah. So I want to get this 100 kPa around the... We'll see. That might be too much. Save, upload. But basically, my 100 kPa range, it's showing... Did I just turn off? Oh, it was that. My 100 kPa range is showing around the 120 to, I think, 180 Newton meters. We're in drive. Let's see how it feels now. So still pulling into gear. We're shifting around 3,200 RPM. Just play attention again. Oh, I'm also in P2. You should be doing this in P1. Back to P1. P2 will pull into gear a bit. Ah, that's nice. All right, that feels all right. Three to 4 is lovely. Let's get back down into first. There's first. We're in. Clutches have grabbed. So around that, when it's in the 2000 RPMs, the shift is way too aggressive. Around 3 to 3.5, it doesn't feel too bad. So let's adjust that part of the map, the 2000 RPM range. Calculated pressure torque. So these numbers here, I'm not going to adjust below 1000 RPM. It's never going to get there anyway. In fact, I'm going to, yeah, we'll do that. Pull a bit more out of these. Oh shit, should be all of this. All of this range. Okay, save, upload. See how that feels. Better. So 1 to 2 is a bit harsh, but we've got to do some adapting, so let's not worry about that one too much. 2 to 3, 3 to 4 is lovely. So good I turned English. Who would have thought? Still pulling a little bit, but it's not terrible. Yeah, look. That's not terrible. Let's see if we can get... So 2 to 3, it's pulling a little bit. We're around 80 kPa on the manifold pressure and it's around 3000 RPM. So let's adjust it down. Don't stall on me. Calculated pressure torque. I'm going to adjust from 4000 down to here. Pull some out of it, pull a bit more. So we're pulling heaps out, but basically we want it to not be a sloppy shift. And if we feel that it's sloppy, if we get excessive slip, just let off and turn the numbers back up. It's a matter of dialing it in for the car, and even dialing it in for the weight the car is moving. So 1 to 2's it's a bit slow. So 2 to 3 was a bit slow then. Let's see if we can feel that one again. Yeah, that's a bit sloppy. So we've gone too far. You can hear it. It's taking too long to shift. It shouldn't take that long. So we've got to go up a little bit between those last 2 adjustments. Let me do that here. So we adjusted from there to there. And once you've got the area that you're working on dialed in, then you can extrapolate out and make the entire table smooth. So we want to add 1.05 or 5% back in. Save, upload. Let's see how that feels. So 1 to 2 is still harsh. 2 to 3 is nice. 3 to 4 is nice. 4 to 5 is nice. All right, we're getting close. We're getting close. Nearly stalled. Two to 3 was a bit pulley then. 3 to 4 was okay. So, look, it's okay. And again, we haven't done adaptations. It hasn't dialed these values in yet. We're just setting base values at the moment. What I'm going to do next, we're coming up to a higher speed road, so I can give it a little bit more throttle. We can get it up higher in the RPM range, and we'll see how it acts there. But if you haven't worked it out, essentially what I'm doing, I'm adjusting the torque value so that P1 is smooth but not sloppy. Sometimes this doesn't take very long. I'm really good at doing diesels now. This is the first time I've done a rotary. I think it's still too high. I think it's still too high. Okay, so we'll pull 5% out of it. I think it's getting there. I think that's pretty good. Something you do need to be aware of, if you go too low, the controller will try and compensate. What I think I need to do, just on that run there, it was a bit flary with higher RPMs. So I'm gonna adjust the 3,000 to 4,000 RPM. I'm just gonna up it a little bit. Yeah, we'll see how that feels. That felt pretty good. Going down to first. So you can see we're around 20% pedal. We're just accelerating basically. That feels nice. All right, we'll go to 35% and we'll have some slightly higher shifts. It might have been a bit slippy, but that might have been just in my head as well. That's feeling pretty good. All right, I wasn't actually watching that. Let's see if we're making any boost yet. I can hear the spool, but I don't think it's positive boost pressure yet. Oh, we are making boost. That's surprising. Okay, so we're gonna do like a half throttle pull now, still in auto mode, and just make sure it doesn't slip when it's making boost. That was me letting off the throttle a bit. I don't think it slipped though. It did feel fast. That didn't feel like half throttle. I'll pay a bit more attention. Yeah, it's slipping. That is slip. Okay, so now we're going to use the pressure multiplier because this is for petrol. A 6-cylinder petrol, I should say. Something that makes torque off boost. We're going to add 30% to it. That'll do. Save. and upload. Now with your pressure multiplier, you can overestimate that a little bit safer, because you're not normally driving around on boost trying to be smooth. A little bit of wheel slip then, I think. But I still feel like the shift took a little bit too long. So let's add a bit more in this range here. We'll add 15% this time. Save and upload. That's doing good things now. And we've got no torque reduction, no shift cut setup, so it's just gearbox managing what the engine's doing. All right, a little bit of boost. I think what I'm gonna do is go to P3, which is the main manual mode we'll use, and I'll control the shifts. I think it's working all right. I think we're getting too much slip. What I'm actually going to do, because it's a bit hard to watch, I'm going to do a log. This is something you can do yourself while you're dialing yours in. In manual mode, I've got to change down. So let's do a log. And the trans is getting hot. I'm just driving around in circles at slow speed. It's not good for it. It's quite nippy. It's surprising me. Didn't make a lot of power on the dyno, but it's not slow. All right, we're getting there. We've got 2 accelerations that we can view. And a little bit of driving. The trans has had a couple of degrees come out of it. Well, now it's gone back up again. Okay, so stop the log. And we want to look at these. I'll just pause the log. So you can see this area. You can see a little bit of slip and then it bites. That makes me think the torque's a little bit too low, but it's not too bad. We're getting about 1/10 of a second of slip before it grabs. That's not terrible. That's okay. That's acceptable. And there's no flare. As soon as it tries to apply pressure, it pulls the RPM down. Look, this looks okay. I'm going to add a little bit of torque to the pressure multiplier again, because we want it to be safe, and basically we'll max out all these values. Now normally it doesn't quite take me as long to do this, and once I've got these base numbers put in, I'll then go and do adaptations, and then the TCU learns everything. I don't think this TCU's done any adapting. I don't think. It's had 1 adaptation shift, which is not enough. And I bet that was when we first went out when I was doing gear shifting. All right, what I'm gonna do from now is just do another couple of laps. You can join me. And I think we'll try it in auto mode. Back to P1 to make sure it feels okay. All right, we're getting there. I want to do a bit more driving, just try and cool the trans down a little bit. But basically what I would normally do is go and do adaptions, which won't happen if the trans is over 80 degrees. But we're driving an auto. It's downshifting on its own. I'm not touching anything. Nearly stalled still. All right, I'll try and get up to the speed limit here. Nearly got to the speed limit. We've got an auto RX-7. It's not tuned yet. We've got an auto RX-7. It's all right. I'm backing off. It makes me back off as soon as it starts to build boost. All right. It's kind of cool. And back to auto. All right, we're back. So you can see the trans is at 102. I'll kill the car. So the trans temperature has gotten to 102. That's absolutely fine, and especially for doing this sort of thing, you're not going to hurt anything. I think the factory cars frequently hit 110. I like to keep them under 100 if we're beating on them, but I just wanted to highlight that when you're driving around that 30 to 60 kilometers an hour, there's not a lot of airflow going through the transcooler, especially if you've got a guard mounted one like this is. This has quite a small transcooler in the guard. It's about the same size as the factory oil cooler. In fact, it may be the factory oil cooler, now I mention that. But yeah, just keep that in mind. If you're not getting any airflow, they will get warm, especially when you're doing the type of stuff with it that we're doing, when you're going through all the gears all the time. And the engine's actually quite hot. In fact, the whole car feels hot. Not designed to be plodded around like that. Yeah, I just wanted to try and highlight that the point is you dial the torque value in to get the shifts smooth in P1. If you do that before you go and do adaptations, you're going to be in a lot better position. The car is going to drive a lot better over time. So yeah, the way that I try and set all the cars up where we've got an internal torque count going on is smooth shifts, P1, 25% throttle-ish when you're going down the road like this. And these numbers here, they may be slightly high still, but I'm going to leave them on the high side until we do adaptation cycles and see how it smooths out. I know the F80 that I set up, obviously it was using torque coming from the factory DME. Factory DME would show about 100 Newton meters gently accelerating down the road, kind of like what we're doing here, that 25% throttle around 100 Newton meters. This is a little bit lower sometimes, but it's a bit of a guide for you. The Land Cruisers, they show about 130 Newton meters doing the same thing, but they're 2 tons heavier than these cars. There's a lot to cover and a lot to get your head around. I say it again, the key point, dial the torque value in so that you've got smooth shifts in P1 around that 25%. Ensure that it's not going to slip when you start to rev on it a little bit and beat on it. And the way that I fixed that with this car was using the pressure multiplier. So every pound of boost. Every kPa that it goes into boost, it adds more to the base value. There is a point where you're gonna run into limitations with the way that the Turbo Lamik does the torque calc, and a car like this might be it, because you might need more base value than the engine is really making due to the torque multiplier, because you can only go 5 times the torque. Maybe, I don't know. It depends how wild and how much boost and how much power the engine makes when it comes onto full song. But what I'm going to do from this point, we're going to let it all cool down. I'm going to do an adaptation cycle, see how it drives. I will do a follow-up video on this car once the engine tune is finalized. It's sort of okay. I know it's had one dyno session, but there's obviously parts of the map that are not dialed in yet. And yeah, I'll show you how the finished product is. But for now, guys, GoPro mounts. Oh, it's punishing me for not doing a video in so long. I reckon I've had to reseat this mount about 20 times. Ugh, just stay stuck, you bastard. Yeah, for now, guys, if you got any questions about dialing in the torque calc in the Turbo Lamik, let me know. But please understand it's very important. If you tell any transmission controller an incorrect torque number, it's going to be fighting on the back foot. Now, I will just touch on another way that a lot of people set up transmissions quickly, because I've recently been playing with Max ECU 8 HP control, and I feel that it's geared in a way to be set up incorrectly, which is fine. But what some people do, they will overestimate the torque and then run a torque reduction during the shift, which is essentially how this car will be set up finally. It will have shift cut, which turns the engine power down whilst you shift. So if you overestimate the torque, like we were doing initially, and you tell the engine to make a little bit less power whilst the shift goes on, it smooths the shift out for you, because essentially the engine lifts off a little bit and it stops it pulling into gear. You don't get that pull into gear. That is another way that a lot of people set up transmissions, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I do worry with the Turbo Lamik, if you do that, if you're overestimating, say, by 150 Newton meters, but you've got torque reduction happening on the shift, so your upshifts are still smooth, it's gonna be confused based on what it learns from the learning algorithm, from the adaptions algorithm. Your downshifts might end up being a problem, because obviously you don't have the ability to pull torque on a downshift. Well, not that I'm aware of. Yeah, I like to dial them in, no torque reduction, just the transmission managing the torque that the engine's making, and then build in safeties afterwards. So if you want shift cut, whatever, do that afterwards. Yeah, this is a really long video, and I know it's going to confuse some people, but hopefully it helps a lot of people that have got a Lamik that isn't doing what they want. As always, thank you for watching. Questions in the comments. See you guys soon. GoPro, stop recording.